Hey there, it's Leona. Welcome to Zen Mindfulness Shodo. Today, we're gonna practice Shodo meditation while focusing on the Hiragana character for ka. So, let's begin our beautiful journey together. When you write a character, imagine a square about the size of the character that you are gonna write like this. First, I'm gonna write it. Then I'm gonna explain the points and tips for writing the character beautifully in detail. Alright, now I'm gonna explain the points and tips for writing this character beautifully. The first stroke starts from a point, a bit lower than, and to the left of, the center point of the top left square. This stroke is slightly curving up, until the middle vertical line. It moves upward to the right. It turns down here. The vertical part of this stroke is slightly curving to the right, until about the same height as the center point of the bottom left square. It moves downward to the left, while curving. This is about the angle. It's slightly leaning to the right. For instance, I'm gonna write an example here. When you create the first stroke like this, and the angle is about 45 degrees, it might look like leaning to the right a little bit. And when you create the first stroke like this, the vertical part of the stroke is almost parallel to the middle vertical line. It doesn't match with the angle of the third stroke, and the character as a whole might look a little bit unbalanced. So try to keep the angle like this. When it turns down here, when it makes a sharp turn like this, the beauty of the curves that are unique to Hiragana characters might not be properly expressed. But when it makes a round turn like this, the character as a whole might look cuter, but it might also look childish. So when it makes a turn here, make a turn with the sharpness somewhere between these two. Try not to make a sharp turn like this. Also try not to make a round turn like this. Then you can better express the beauty of curves that are unique to Hiragana. At the end of the stroke, it checks upward to the left, towards the starting point of the second stroke. Before touching the paper for the second stroke, move your pen up from the end point of the first stroke like this. The second stroke starts from a point slightly higher than the center point of the top left square. In this case, it's almost the same height as the center point of the top left square. But that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be precise. Somewhere around here. This stroke moves downward to the left, while curving to the left and getting thicker. By making the curve and changing the thickness of the stroke, you can better express the beauty of softness and roundness that are unique to Hiragana. This stroke moves downward to the left, parallel to the vertical or diagonal part of the first stroke. It goes through about the middle of the horizontal part of the first stroke. When it doesn't go through the middle, for example, when you create the second stroke like this, or when you create the second stroke like this, so the top one, the second stroke is going through a point, a bit to the right of the middle of the horizontal part of the first stroke. So this space gets smaller. The bottom one is that the second stroke is going through a point, a bit to the left of the middle of the horizontal part of the first stroke. So it's going through like this. This space gets bigger. But this part of the stroke gets shorter. So it doesn't look balanced. So try to make it go through a point about the middle of the horizontal part of the first stroke. About the length of the stroke. The end point of the stroke. It's a bit higher than the lowest point of the first stroke, and a bit to the right of the starting point of the first stroke. It shouldn't go to the left of the starting point of the first stroke. For example, if you make the second stroke like this, in this case, the end point is lower than the lowest point of the first stroke. Then the second stroke looks too long for the first stroke, and the character as a whole might not look balanced. But when you create the second stroke like this, it looks too short for the first stroke, and the character as a whole doesn't look balanced either. So try to make the length of the second stroke not too long and not too short. Of course, it's totally fine to create this stroke with the same thickness all the way through from the beginning point to the end point. But it's more beautiful when it gets thicker as it moves downward to the left like this. From the beginning point of the first stroke, the pen moves like this, and from the end point of the second stroke, the pen moves upward to the right like this. The third stroke starts from my imaginary extension line drawn from the horizontal part of the first stroke, or slightly lower than that. For instance, if you make the third stroke like this, or like this, but the top one, the starting point of the third stroke, is higher than the imaginary extension line drawn from the horizontal part of the first stroke. And for the bottom one, the starting point of the third stroke is lower than the imaginary extension line drawn from the horizontal part of the first stroke. If you write this character like this, the character as a whole might not look balanced. If you practice writing this character with the right stroke order and the smooth movement of the pen, the third stroke will be able to start at appropriate height for the first two strokes. It moves downward to the right at about a 45-degree angle while curving up or curving to the right. The space to the right of the end point of the third stroke and the space to the left of the starting point of the first stroke are almost the same size. When this stroke moves downward to the right until that point, the whole character is placed in the center of the square box, so it looks balanced and beautiful. You can also aim for a point a little bit higher than the end point of the second stroke. For example, when you create the third stroke like this, in this case, the end point is lower than the end point of the second stroke. The third stroke looks too long for the first two strokes. When you make the third stroke like this, in this case, the end point of the third stroke is higher than the end point of the second stroke, but it looks a bit too high. So the third stroke looks too short for the first two strokes. I've explained a lot of things, but keep these points and tips in mind when you practice. The key points for writing hiragana characters, as explained in the video, are concisely summarized in this book in a similar manner. The book allows you 3 pages to practice each character. It can be purchased on Amazon. See the link in the description. I'm gonna practice 1 page of this workbook this time, but you're welcome to practice as much as you want. If you're practicing with a pen, I recommend that you place a few pieces of paper under the page that you're writing on, so that the ink doesn't bleed onto the page under it. Alright, let's get started. Before you start writing, take a deep breath and clear your mind. Slowly breathe in as much air as you can through your nose, and exhale all the negative emotions that you've been holding until this moment through your mouth. When you are mentally ready to write, you can start writing. Check the starting point, turning point, end point, the angle of the stroke, the direction of the curve, and the lines that gradually get thicker. After that, without hesitation, aim for the end point and move the pen smoothly. Try to write much slower than you normally write, putting your heart and soul into each stroke. However, if you move the pen too slowly, the lines will become shaky, and if you move the pen too quickly, the lines will become thinner in areas you don't want them to be thinner. So concentrate on finding the right speed. Once you've finished writing the character, look at the character as a whole and think about what changes you should make next in order to make it look even more beautiful. Of course, you don't have to take all the tips and points that I've told you and copy my way of writing the character. Trust your own sense of beauty and adjust accordingly. It's important that you're satisfied with the shapes of the characters you write. So, please use my tips and points as ideas and hints for adjusting the shape of the character to your sense of beauty. Of course, you can't change the shape so much that it no longer looks like a character. If you notice that you're thinking about something else while writing, immediately refocus on what you're writing. By repeating this exercise, you'll be able to notice when your attention starts to turn to something unrelated to your current action, and gradually improve your concentration and self-control. So, let's learn and practice together again in my next video. Thank you for watching.